Welcome to this explainer. If you were to zoom way out and observe the human species from an evolutionary distance, you'd immediately notice a profound, almost cosmic absurdity in how we perceive ourselves. We've constructed this civilization-wide belief system, a grand myth, really, of the sovereign pilot. We absolutely love to believe that there's an untouchable, perfectly rational self sitting comfortably right behind our eyes, steering the biological machinery with absolute flawless control. Well, today, we're going to look closely at the wet, physical tissue of that machinery, and we're going to completely dismantle that myth. Think about it for a second. We're a species that eagerly, almost automatically, forgives a liver for failing under the heavy pressure of too many Friday nights. We extend unquestioning sympathy to a heart for faltering under the invisible weight of a genetic predisposition. We certainly don't look at a struggling kidney and tell it to simply filter more positively. Yet we uniquely, and somewhat bizarrely, hold a malfunctioning brain morally accountable. Why does the brain have to fill out character paperwork just to be sick? To really get this, we've got to look at the baseline biology. Consider where our emotional weather actually originates. It's a striking reality of our anatomy that roughly 90% of the human body's serotonin, the primary molecule associated with mood regulation, the very chemical dictating whether you have a good Tuesday or a bad one, is produced not up in the skull, but down in the gut. The profound emotional life of these highly accomplished apes is, in significant part, merely a digestive project. And this sets up a truly fascinating logical error, one running entirely on meat. We semi-evolved primates treat our passing emotions as weather reports. We instinctively understand that you don't just choose to summon a thunderstorm. We don't associate a fundamental moral failure with the spontaneous rumbling actions of our intestinal tracts. Yet we entirely refuse to apply this exact same, perfectly sound logic to the organ that is actively generating the thunderstorm. This right here illustrates the central, magnificent irony of our existence. The human being who has never once been asked to consciously manage their kidney filtration rate or willfully generate their own insulin has somehow developed the sincere, unwavering conviction that they should be able to regulate their own complex serotonin levels through pure willpower alone. It's incredible. Let's zoom out, say roughly 2 million years out, to see how this builds into our societal architecture. Meet the behavioral immune system. This is our ancient evolutionary firmware. It operates on a deeply ingrained smoke detector principle. Because, evolutionarily speaking, it's far better for an ancient primate to be safe and disgusted than dead from a novel virus. So this system triggers instant, unthinking avoidance responses toward anyone displaying abnormal cues. Its sole purpose? Protect the tribe from infection. But here's the catch. This ancient pathogen avoidance protocol is incredibly imprecise. It fires in the 100 to 300 millisecond range, well before conscious thought can even begin to form a coherent sentence. It fundamentally cannot distinguish between a person who is a contagious plague vector and a person whose dopamine signaling is just temporarily dysregulated. When you feel a sudden, inexplicable aversion to someone experiencing a severe depressive episode, that is a firmware limitation. It is not a moral failing. Which leads us directly into what we can call the specification trap. Picture a patient arriving at a modern clinic, burdened with severe depression. The doctor's brain carefully assesses the situation, runs the diagnostics, and then earnestly recommends that the patient's brain try to think more positively, using the very brain that is currently malfunctioning. Think about how absurd that is. The brain is the only organ expected to fix itself, using itself. Over time, this little internal biological glitch eventually becomes external physical architecture. Just consider the bizarre, almost dystopian dichotomy of the modern two-floor hospital. It's the exact same brutalist building, the exact same filtered oxygen cycling through the vents, but entirely different, heavily enforced laws of physics are applied depending on which elevator button you press. On floor 4, cardiology, patients receive a steady stream of visitors, glossy sympathy cards, and bright sunflowers for a leaking heart valve. It's treated as a tragedy of the flesh. But hit the button for floor 7, psychiatry, and patients suffering from a leaking prefrontal cortex receive hushed voices, separate entrances, and anxious relatives who lie to the neighbors about where they're going. The institution extends profound warmth to one organ and structurally, methodically hides another. So, where did this two-story civilization come from? The roots go agonizingly deep. In the ancient era, mental illness was viewed as demonic possession. In the Dark Middle Ages, it was cleanly categorized as sin. But the modern, lingering stigma? That has a precise publication date, 1641. René Descartes formalized the mind-body split, arguing that the body is just a machine, but the mind is the self. Since that year, if your brain breaks, we don't say the machine broke, we say you broke. A sick brain instantly triggers identity dissolution. And this 400-year-old Cartesian ghost story isn't just a private, philosophical, or quietly emotional issue. It is a massive, highly quantifiable public health crisis. The global treatment gap, created purely by the heavy burden of shame and the stigma of mental illness, costs the global economy roughly $1 trillion every single year. Just gone. Shame, as it turns out, has a very real, calculable price tag. Over the last couple of decades, well-meaning apes launched massive awareness campaigns to try and fix this error. The strategy was to cleanly rebrand psychological suffering entirely as a biological brain disease. The logic seemed absolutely airtight, right? If we just tell the tribe it's nothing more than a broken machine, just a matter of genetics and neurochemistry, we move the self out of the way, and the tribe will surely respond with sunflowers. But here is the profound, tragic paradox. A landmark 2018 meta-analysis by Lofman and Haslam revealed that this purely biological framing actively backfired. Telling people that mental illness is a fundamental brain disease actually increased their desire for social distance. The cure, which was intended to bring us together, made the isolation significantly worse. Why? Because when you tell a primate their group member has fundamentally broken hardware, they don't help repair it. They simply move their nest to an entirely different tree. This triggers the devastating stigma-symptom loop. Initial psychological distress leads to a deep fear of societal judgment, which directly leads to concealment. The stigma acts as a powerful secondary illness, amplifying the original suffering as the person exhausts themselves fighting society's quiet exclusion instead of just fighting the medical condition. Now, let's look at the sheer physical reality of this. We've peered deep inside the skull, and the damage is undeniable. For example, post-traumatic stress disorder is robustly associated with a bilateral reduction in the volume of the hippocampus by up to 22%. That is not a metaphor. That's measurable, undeniable physical damage, visible on standard scanning equipment. Observe the stark contrast here. A visible broken femur commands automatic, visceral empathy. The viewer leans forward to help. But the invisible fracture of the mind, structurally altered, diminished tissue, makes the viewer nervously look away. The physical evidence of the damage is equally real in both scenarios. The empathy, sadly, is not. We've basically constructed a deeply surreal existential courtroom inside our societies. Imagine the brain, dressed in heavy judge's robes, sitting high behind a bench, carefully reviewing the file of another malfunctioning brain. When a brain that happens to be experiencing full cognitive function issues the solemn judgment that another person is somehow weak for having a misfiring configuration of the exact same 86 billion neurons, who exactly is authorizing that judgment? The crucial, absurd point is this. The only organ in the known universe capable of inventing the beautiful concept of mercy has somehow inexplicably exempted its own physical biology from the application of that mercy. We are forced to consider that the sovereign pilot we are so desperately trying to protect is just a ghost, a phantom we created simply to avoid looking at the cold, hard reality of the machine. The monkey has noticed that we are the only animal that looks at a malfunctioning brain and demands to know, what did you do wrong? But if we finally accepted the overwhelming evidence, if we truly admitted that the mind is just the brain doing its job, entirely vulnerable to the exact same laws of physics as a brittle bone or a failing kidney, what part of your identity would you be most afraid to lose? Think about that.